Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I'm Paul Ndiho, and joining me on Facebook Live is Shaka Sali himself. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
Welcome to Shaka Extra Time.
Thank you very much. In fact, I am hugely terrific to be here with you.
And a warm welcome to you all our Facebook followers watching us live from all over the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to ask Shaka Sali himself some questions. And today we'll be taking some of those questions. But before we take the questions, Shaka, let's start in Uganda. There is this article that has been circulating on social media. The author claims to have talked to you, and that you are calling on the Ugandan youth to uprise against the leadership of the country. Is there any merit to that article that is circulating on the internet?
Absolutely not, because you're talking about someone claiming to have actually talked with me. The last person that probably interviewed me was last week, and to the best of my memory, that person is Paul Ndiho, right here.
So at no point did you mention that you're calling on the youth of Uganda to take on the leadership of the country?
First of all, mention to who and from what forum. The fact of the matter is that somebody has to be very, very innovative, very sophisticated. It is, in fact, that picture is a reflection of the attire that I happened to be wearing last week when I was hosting an edition of Straight Talk Africa on the Cameroon. It had absolutely nothing to do with Uganda. So I think that there is somebody who is very sophisticated, very innovative, very creative. They have a certain agenda and they have a statement, and they probably see some kind of integrity in an individual known as Shaka Sali. And so basically all they did was get my picture and associate whatever their statement was with my picture. Having said that, you've known me for a very, very long time, Paul. I have never described what is going on in Uganda, at least economically, as being based on border economics. If there is border economics, if in fact I had to come up with some sort of statement probably on what is going on, I would be tempted to borrow a leaf from a Republican presidential candidate known as George H.W. Bush back in 1980, running against Ronald Reagan. He described his economic policy as voodoo economics. I would probably have said that. But you know, when you are in this kind of business like I am really, you have to know that you are a target. You are game. And for that, I am reminded of a Chinese adage, ancient adage, which says, men dread fame, just like a pig dreads fattening, for both could be a prelude to slaughter.
Interesting. Let's start off with maybe another crisis happening on the continent, the immigrant crisis. A lot of migrants are crossing into Europe. They are dying trying to cross the Mediterranean. As we speak, hundreds were rescued the last couple of days, and I'm sure some are being rescued as we speak today, mainly from Eritrea and Ethiopia. What could be the cause for this migrant crisis? Why are Africans trying to run away from Africa?
Part of it, of course, you would almost automatically say is lack of stability. So obviously it means instability in certain countries. You could talk about, for example, South Sudan. We don't hear a lot about South Sudanese trying to cross the Mediterranean, but of course they are heading for the nearest political tall grass in Uganda, in Ethiopia, in Sudan. Now, when you're talking about Eritrea, you have to look at the policies of that government in Asmara. The policies are not really very encouraging. They don't seem to be development-oriented, or at least they are not empowering people to the extent that people feel comfortable staying where they are. People have no jobs and what have you. They have no money to spend. And so they don't see their future right there. So they have to figure out some other alternatives. I think mainly, Paul, it is that the captains of African countries, the men and women in charge of most African countries, are not doing their job. They are not doing what they are supposed to do in order, for example, to motivate and inspire their people to believe in themselves, to work very hard, because let's face it, most of these countries have great arable land they could cultivate and in fact become food baskets or bread baskets of their own territories and beyond. So I think the answer, frankly, whether one likes it or not, is democracy. It is democracy, and you can only get that if, for example, people are empowered to such an extent that they have an opportunity to choose who their leaders should be. And their leaders, and those types of leaders, frankly, they need to be having integrity. They need to be people of character. They need to be people who are pro-development and pro-people. And I think there is a huge problem of leadership deficit in Africa.
Is this something that could be prevented? Because when you look at the rate at which these people are fleeing, the rate at which they are dying, one wonders why. Why is it so important to put your life on the line for you to cross to Europe or to come to America? What are those fundamental things that maybe our leaders back in Africa need to deal with?
The bottom line, Paul, is that there are forces that push, and these could be economic, political, cultural, and social, or a combination of all the above. And there are also forces that pull. And forces that pull, obviously, happen to be beyond the Mediterranean. They are in Europe. People feel that if they can get an opportunity to cross the Atlantic, their lives will improve. They think that they can get a job. In Uganda, I think they metaphorically refer it to as cheyo, nkube cheyo. It means that you do the sort of type of jobs that, natives or people who are citizens of those countries don't want to touch. So it's a question of forces that pull. That happens to be in Europe, in North America, in Australia and other places, and forces that push, meaning, frankly, one does not have much of options where they see themselves.
How about the continental body, the African Union? Is there where the African Union can play a leading role, maybe to sort of start like centers in the various countries that can maybe train these people to have certain skills, whether it's in carpentry, whether it's in engineering? Is there something that they can do at that level to stop this kind of migration to Europe?
The African Union, obviously, when you look at it on paper, it looks potentially a great institution. But when you look at its structure and you see what kind of power it has, the best way, frankly, if I were to communicate with a very ordinary African, is to say that yes, the African Union has teeth. The question is, do those teeth actually bite? It looks like they actually don't, because power is in member states which form up that institution, the African Union. I think that even though I frankly didn't study much economics, you don't need to be an economic expert, frankly, to know whether there is a development in an area or whether the economic policies are working. Because I borrow a leaf from a former friend of mine who happened to be Ghanaian president for almost 19 years, and that was Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. He used to say that you don't really need to be an economist to know whether people are better off than they were yesterday and than today or not, because the economics that he thought you should understand, and everybody frankly should understand, is whether that economics is reflected in the people's stomachs or people's neighborhoods. And I think for the most part, where a lot of these Africans are coming from really, do not have those types of conditions. That's why they have to look for elsewhere.
Let's go to the comments. Let's start with Oben Tesparo from Nigeria. Will Nigeria ever know peace until the son of a nobody can become somebody without knowing anybody?
Well, I think it is going to happen because, after all, some of these people that you see who have had opportunities to be at the political harem of their countries. For example, when I look at a person like the former president of Nigeria, not once, not twice, perhaps in fact 3 times, the man, the big ogre from Abeokuta. I'm talking about General Olusegun Obasanjo, retired, but certainly not tired. He was not really coming from a very rich background. He came from a very humble beginning. He worked his way by joining the military in the late 1950s and worked his way up and eventually became the #1 person of his country. And there are a lot of other people that I have read stories who are in Nigeria who definitely were not born as rich. They worked very hard. They were also very disciplined. And to a certain degree, they were also very lucky. Sometimes it's a question of being the right person in the right place at the right time.
Can Oben's example be replicated across Africa? Can an ordinary African living in some remote place in Zambia or Zimbabwe or Uganda rise up to the occasion and be somebody?
Oh, sure. And in fact, there are so many examples. People were born not very well off. They went to school, for example. If you had opportunities, you had missionary schools, for example, in certain neighborhoods. And people got scholarships or they were being helped by, the missionaries. They would do some work and in return they would get opportunities to go to school. And if they worked hard at their books, and some actually did happen to work very hard, they were able to go through different levels of education to the extent that they even ended up going to college and earning a degree. And degrees, until about 20 years ago, really, in Africa, were very, very important. They were something akin to a passport, frankly, to live a life of what you would characterize as a middle class type of life. And there are so many people to boot, people who became presidents for the most part. They were not born from families that were very privileged. People who became cabinet ministers, people who became bishops, people who became professors. There are so many of that. And even in fact, some of the remarkable business people on the African continent, they were not born into privileges. So it is possible. If you can work hard, you are disciplined, and you are able to identify what you want, then you look for the tools that you need with a bit of luck. Hey, you may find yourself at that destination. But as somebody once said, life is not really, life for success is not about a destination. You have to look at it in the context of a journey.
Okay, very interesting. Let's go to another Facebook comment. This is a question from Rovaktas Kashmin. Mr. Shaka, do you think there is hope in African politics that can bring about a democracy and end poverty on the continent?
Oh yeah, there is hope, but this hope, of course, has to be brought by those of us who happen to be Africans. Again, as I said, we need leaders. Leadership is very, very important. If you can get a leader who obviously reflects the basic values of society, somebody that has integrity, somebody that has character, somebody that loves his community, somebody that believes in himself and believes in his community and neighborhood and believes in his people and has confidence in his people. He can motivate them, he can inspire them to rise to the occasion.
Another comment from Brian, Muhindo Brian in Uganda. He says, Shaka, discuss for me the future of Uganda according to its political, financial, and social foundation.
I have to say, frankly, that that is a $1 billion question. You probably need an entire edition, frankly, to get into that. So for that matter, I can only say Uganda needs to be on the right track, because right now, yes, Ugandans have been told that they're on the right track, but the fact of the matter is, when they look themselves in the mirror, I am sure that they know where they are or where they are not. So I think that Ugandans have to assert themselves. They have to know that they have rights. They are citizens. They are not subjects of any particular person, and therefore they are the sovereign state. They should have a situation and opportunities to choose their leaders in a manner that is open, transparent, and credible. If they can get those types of people, then they can get the sort of leaders, frankly, who believe and can actually put in place policies that reflect socio-economic justice for all.
But Shaka, the last time I checked, Uganda has had periodic elections that have been quote-unquote won by a president who has been sworn in, and maybe the opposition has challenged some of these elections, but the courts in Uganda rule in favor of the current president, saying that the elections were held in a free, fair, and transparent manner.
I don't know why you keep taking me back really to that point, because I think we have really talked a lot about that point and exhausted it. I think we know that the facts will show that countries like Uganda and a lot of other countries on the African continent, the ruling party and the state or the government, as it were, are fused. There's no separation of the people who are in charge of power. They control the three organs of the government, for example, the judiciary system, obviously, which controls the court system that you are talking about. They control the legislature, parliament, or national assembly, or a house of deputies, whatever you want to call it. They control the executive, obviously, because it is the executive actually who controls everything, controls the institutions which some people would refer to as institutions of violence. Others might say they are security institutions. We're talking about the police, the intelligence, the military. And so, for the most part, individuals who have come to power through AK-47, for some strange reason, it looks like they feel that they're entitled, frankly, to power. And the others are entitled, or their entitlement is to follow. And so what happens, all you do is, if you're an African dictator, you control the means of violence, which are security institutions, to intimidate, to control. You also control the treasury, because you need some money sometimes to compromise some people, because a lot of people are patriotic to their stomachs, not their neighborhoods or brothers or sisters.
Let's go to another comment, this time from Chabala Henry. Most politics in Africa is like that book, The Animal Farm. In fact, he reminds me of that classic novel written by George Orwell, and first published, I think, was it 1945, where Mr. Orwell was very critical of Stalin. Is his observation on point, making an argument like that, saying that most politics in Africa reminds him of that book?
I think he's right, because if you are talking about societies or nations, frankly, where there is hardly democracy, that is precisely what, the characters in Animal Farm were doing. You are talking about Boxer, the guy that was basically able and ready to take orders or instructions. You are talking about Napoleon, Comrade Napoleon, Snowball, and what have you. But it also should remind you of another book that was written pretty much at the same time, which is called Darkness at Noon by Arthur Koestler. It talks about a situation, for example, which obviously was a dictatorship, and where the state is going to go for certain people either on sectarian grounds, and because you are going for Catholics, you say you are not a Catholic because you are a Protestant or a Muslim. And then the next time they look for people who are probably short, you say, I am not short, I am tall. The next time they look out for people who are organized, who are members of trade unions, and you say, look, the last time I checked, I was not a member of a trade union. And they say, those days they will say they go for Jews. You say, no, I am not a Jew. But guess what? At some point, they come for you actually, and there is not a single individual left to protect you. That's what happens, especially if you live in a society that is undemocratic. If you live in a society that does not, for example, have respect for fundamental human rights. If you live in a society that is not based on the rule of law, transparency, integrity, justice. And when we talk about justice here, or peace, or stability, it is not that it is the absence of war, or the absence of people fighting. It has to be the presence of social economic justice for all of us.
Interesting. Let's go to another comment from Congo. Hosea Simpanye. Why has Joseph Kabila put the opponent as a prime minister? What strategy is he playing? Are Congolese so dull to see that he's playing games?
Well, it is politics, and politics, as you know, can make the possible impossible. It can also, by the same token, make the impossible possible. And so I'm sure that Joseph Kabila has a strategy. I am sure that he has some objectives, and he has to figure out how to, for example, to attain those objectives. He identified an individual, from what I have read, who has in fact been expelled from, I think, the most important political party or political group in the DRC. And so the reason he decides to go with this individual, perhaps, is precisely because he doesn't want to deal with the dynamics, political dynamics of the huge opposition party. He likes to deal with an individual who he hopes will probably also bring on board some of his former colleagues in the party where he was. And eventually, you're talking about having some kind of compromise, and things go on perhaps the way Kabila hopes it should happen as far as he's concerned. So it's about politics. Politics is about who gets what, when, why, and where. Politics is, in a sense, about expediency. It's not about things that are inexpedient.
Let's go to another comment from Muhammad Fosia Gujra. Somaliland has been looking for an international recognition for 26 years, and it has not yet achieved it. What will be the future of Somaliland?
I think that they seem to be doing a very good job, by the way, because despite their having not been recognized by the international community, I think everybody who would like to know and everybody who monitors and follow the developments in that part of what used to be Somalia knows that things work in Somaliland. And by the way, to give it a little bit of background, at one time it used to be English-speaking Somalia. It was under the British before it joined with Somalia, which had been under the Italians, so that it formed a sort of federation. But then things, of course, especially with the 20 years of dictatorship under General Siad Barre, things became untenable, and they eventually decided to withdraw back into Hargeisa, the capital of what used to be Somaliland. They have had, for example, elections sincerely, anybody will tell you, which are remarkably democratic. Elections that have been free, fair, transparent, and credible. You have even been in a situation, in fact, where an incumbent president in Somaliland has conceded a defeat. He's been defeated, considered a defeat with grace, and there has been a peaceful transfer of power from one individual to the other, which is not been really happening in the other part of what used to be Somalia until recently. But even then, that happened under, for example, an army that is of international nature. because Somalia does not have, frankly, a functioning military that takes care of its borders and what have you. It has AMISOM, which is the kind of army that is in fact an African Union army working together with the UN and tapping essentially from the national armies of Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, Djibouti, and until recently, Ethiopia.
Let's go to our final comment from Crispin Triple Chanda. What's your take on Hachilinde Hichilema's arrest in Zambia? There's been a lot of talk about his arrest. People compared it to what has been happening in Uganda. To this day, the guy is still locked up. Your take?
It's very unfortunate because from really what I have read, I think that it shouldn't really happen that way in a country like Zambia. Because frankly, at one time, it clearly looked like, as far as democracy is concerned, Zambia had actually gotten out of the woods. But I think with the government under President Edgar Lungu, it seems like, you know, at one time you take 2 steps forward in terms of democracy, and you take 3 steps backwards. From what I read, really, just because the guy happened to be driving on a road, really, he happens to be a legitimate citizen of Zambia, and he was not the only person, by the way, from what I saw, who was driving on that road. There were apparently so many other people. But in this particular case, it is only him who has been identified, who has been locked up, and so far, it seems to me they have charged him with treason. Can you imagine? Perhaps part of the reason, of course, is that President Lungu probably is not confident to the degree that he is, you know, he really can feel that he doesn't have to do what he did, because let's face it, until now, he does not have political recognition of the former presidential candidate, Hichilema, because Hichilema feels that he was robbed politically. He felt, and in fact it looks like there are a lot of evidence, probably, that could point in that direction. So the fact that Hichilema does not recognize President Lungu's tenure in State House Lusaka is probably part of the reason why he has to be taken through those types of motions. But I hope that, you know, one of these days, the president of Zambia will probably see sense in being magnanimous. You know, frankly, I have seen somewhere where he said that there are appeals coming from civil society, the international community, for him to interfere and so that his political opponent can be released. And he said, under no circumstances is he going to interfere, as if in fact he wasn't interfering, because there are a lot of other people who say he actually has been interfering, because he actually controls the judiciary system in Zambia, and therefore he controls also the police and what have you. And so these people are taking orders from him. I have no evidence, of course, to conclude that, but let's face it, he has the power to do the right thing, and I hope he can actually do the right thing.
I don't. We still have maybe time for one brief question from Joshua. Oh, okay, I think we've run out of time. On that note, Shaka Sali, thank you so much for being here today, and I look forward to another interaction next week. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Yeah.